November 12th, 2023, Brixton, South London. It was a normal Thursday night. Pints clinking, football on the screen, the smell of rain drifting in from the street. Then, a man in a dark parka stepped into the pub garden. He didn't rush, he didn't shout. He just walked straight to one table and opened fire. 3 muffled shots. The target slumped forward before anyone realized what was happening. The shooter was already gone, swallowed by the crowd, before the pint glass hit the ground. Within minutes, the victim's name would ricochet through London's underworld. By dawn, an entire cartel would be leaderless. This wasn't a fight. It wasn't a robbery. This was a message, and the man who sent it had been planning for over a year. But to understand why a cartel boss was executed in front of strangers, you have to go back to the night a billion-pound supply line was almost exposed. This is the story of a London cartel war that began in the shadows of the city's nightclubs and ended in blood on a Brixton pavement. A war fought not with screaming street gangs, but with encrypted messages, clean couriers, and silent, surgical hits carried out in public spaces. In the next few minutes, you'll see how 2 of the capital's most sophisticated cartels built their empires, how a single botched deal lit the fuse, and how one calculated hit would shift the balance of power in London's underworld. And it all started with a billion-pound supply line and a single betrayal. For years, London's drug trade had 2 dominant players. The Camden Syndicate, led by Danny Kershaw, 36. Low profile, calculated. On paper, he ran construction companies and a small portfolio of rental properties. Off paper, he controlled one of the city's cleanest heroin and cocaine pipelines, built on discipline, compartmentalization, and silence. Then, there was the Southside crew, headed by Lenny Brook, 42. Once a nightclub king in South London, he had traded strobe lights for shipping containers. Lenny liked to be seen. Flash cars, gold watches, champagne on Instagram. But behind the gloss was a man with a violent reputation and a growing influence on London's ports. Both cartels kept their distance. They controlled separate routes, separate territories, separate worlds. But they shared one weak spot, a Rotterdam supply hub that fed both of their operations. For years, the arrangement held. It wasn't friendship, it was survival. Neither side wanted a war that would draw police attention. Then, one November morning, that balance shattered. A Rotterdam freight boat arrived light. 5 million pounds worth of cocaine missing without a trace. And when that kind of money vanishes, everyone in the underworld knows one thing. This won't end with negotiations. The missing Rotterdam shipment was the first crack. The second was far more public. In January 2023, a joint deal between the Camden Syndicate and the Southside crew went bad. 2 Southside couriers were stopped at Dover. Customs officers found 40 kilos of high-purity cocaine hidden inside modified van panels. Street value over 3 million pounds. The bust made headlines for a day, but in the underworld, the real story spread in whispers. Evidence from the arrest, timing, inspection method, the fact that customs had been waiting, suggested someone had tipped them off, and Southside's eyes turned to Camden. Lenny Brook didn't go to the police, he went to fire. 2 weeks later, a Camden stash house in Barking went up in flames. By morning, neighbors were still watching the smoke rise over the terraced rooftops. No one was hurt, but over 100 kilos of product and 400,000 pounds in cash were gone. The message was clear. What had once been tense coexistence collapsed into open hostility. Quiet sit-downs in Shoreditch bars turned into encrypted threats pinged between burner phones. Every meeting, every handshake now carried the weight of knowing one wrong move could trigger the next hit. And in the middle of it, both sides were already looking for the man who could end this feud in one move. His name was Ryan Hale, 29 years old. On paper, he was clean. No convictions, no police interest, no reason to raise a flag. In reality, he was Camden Syndicate's quiet problem solver. Hale had spent 6 years in the British Army, tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, commended for marksmanship, noted for discipline. Then in 2018, he was discharged. Conduct issues was the official line. What that meant in practice was never made public. After leaving the forces, he slipped into civilian life with calculated ease. A modest flat in Croydon, a long-term girlfriend who thought he worked security for events. A life that looked ordinary enough to pass casual scrutiny. But Hale was not ordinary. He was trained, patient, and obsessive about preparation. Friends from the army remembered him as the kind of soldier who had memorized the layout of a compound before stepping inside. That habit had never left him. When Daniel Kershaw needed someone who could move without drawing attention, who could plan and execute a job without loose ends, he knew exactly who to call. The brief was simple. The meaning was not. Make sure Lenny doesn't see New Year's. Ryan Hale didn't rush. He never did. For 3 weeks, he became a shadow in Lenny Brook's life. From the gym in Clapham, to the barber on Peckham High Street, to the mistress's flat in Lewisham, Hale was never far, but never close enough to be noticed. He learned the routes, the timings, the habits, which door Lenny used to slip out of the club without being seen, how long he spent at the gym before heading to lunch, and most importantly, that every Thursday night, without fail, Lenny Brook ended up in the pub garden at the King's Arms in Brixton. When Hale was ready, the props arrived. A fake courier's uniform, a branded takeaway bag, 2 electric scooters bought in cash from a shop in Camden. Items chosen to blend into the city, to be invisible until the moment they weren't. A safe flat in Vauxhall was rented under a false name. Inside, nothing but a mattress, a folding chair, a small arsenal of burner phones, and a bag with cash and clothes ready for the escape. Hale wasn't just preparing for the hit. He was building a routine that no one would notice until it was too late. If you followed the story this far, drop "still here" in the comments. Let's see who's paying attention. November 12th, 2023. Brixton. Rain hammered the streets, pooling in the cracks of the pavement, turning the glow from passing headlights into smeared ribbons of light. Across from the King's Arms pub, Ryan Hale stood in the shadows, head down, delivery jacket zipped to the chin. A branded takeaway bag hung from his hand, the kind you'd forget in seconds. Inside it, a silenced pistol. Through the steamed pub windows, he could see the Thursday night crowd packed into the garden under heat lamps. Lenny Brook was there, exactly where he had seen him so many times before, pint in hand, laughing with 2 men. He didn't look like a man expecting to die. Hale checked the street. No police, no one paying attention. He stepped off the curb, crossed the road, and pushed open the garden gate. No words, no hesitation. From the fake takeaway bag, the pistol came up smooth and steady. 3 shots. Muffled. Precise. 1 to the chest, 2 to the head. Brook collapsed forward, the pint spilling into his lap before the glass hit the ground. The garden erupted, chairs scraping, people shouting, the smell of burnt gunpowder cutting through the damp air. Hale turned, slipped back through the gate, and was gone. By the time anyone thought to follow, all they saw was a hooded figure on an electric scooter disappearing into the rain. On CCTV, he was nothing more than a blur, a ghost, in the city. The first officers arrived within minutes. Brook was already gone, pronounced dead at the scene, but even in the chaos, something stood out. His wallet was still in his pocket, his watch was still on his wrist. This wasn't a robbery. Detectives from the Met Specialist Crime Command took over fast. They knew what this was, a professional hit. And in London, that meant 2 things, CCTV and time. Within hours, the city's vast camera network began telling its story. The shooter was spotted leaving the King's Arms Garden, crossing Brixton Road, and mounting a small electric scooter. From there, cameras followed him through back streets, past bus lanes, until the trail ended near the Vauxhall Riverside. That's where they found it. A delivery jacket stuffed into a bin, soaked through with rain, and beside it, the abandoned scooter. Forensics moved in. A trace of gunpowder on the jacket's sleeve, and inside the scooter's helmet, a single short brown hair. Enough for a DNA profile. But the cameras weren't the only thing watching that night. Cell tower data showed a burner phone pinging repeatedly near the King's Arms in the hours before the shooting and again in Vauxhall minutes after. It wasn't much, but in cases like this, every breadcrumb mattered. And soon those crumbs would lead them straight to Ryan Hale. In the days after the Brixton shooting, the investigation into Lenny Brook's murder was already moving beyond the moment of the hit. The Met's Specialist Crime Command knew that a clean, precise assassination like this wasn't just about one man pulling a trigger, it was the end result of weeks, maybe months of planning. And whoever ordered it was still out there. The CCTV trail and forensics had given them Ryan Hale's name. Once they had it, everything started to shift. Hale's military background explained the methodical approach, but his civilian life, security jobs, no convictions, low profile, didn't fit the profile of someone willing to execute a cartel boss in public. If he was taking this kind of risk, it meant one thing. He was working for someone bigger. Surveillance teams were deployed before Hale even knew he was a suspect. Plainclothes officers tracked him from his Croydon flat to backstreet cafes in Kentish Town to quiet car parks in Islington. At first, the meeting seemed harmless, quick conversations with men in hoodies, exchanges of small envelopes. But then, a familiar face appeared in the grainy long-lens photographs. Danny Kershaw. Kershaw hadn't been seen on police radars in over a year. The leader of the Camden syndicate preferred to work through intermediaries, insulating himself from the product and the risk. He kept his official businesses spotless: construction firms, property management, and a consulting company that existed only on paper, but everyone in the Met's organized crime division knew his name. The fact that Hale was meeting Kershaw within a week of the Brixton heist was no coincidence.
When detectives applied and secured covert monitoring of Hale's flat in Croydon and the Vauxhall safe house, they weren't looking for direct admissions. No one in this business said, "kill him," on the phone. But what they did find was just as damning. On one of Hale's seized burner phones, stored in a hidden compartment in a wardrobe, were weeks' worth of encrypted chats. Most were mundane: times, locations, stock updates, coded in a way only insiders would understand. But one thread, dated 2 weeks before the hit, stood out. In a conversation traced to a number later confirmed as belonging to Kershaw, Hale received a message: "We can't run the building with that landlord in place. Time to hand him his notice." To outsiders, it was nothing. To the detectives, removing the landlord was a phrase they'd heard before. It was slang, used in other intercepted communications for taking out a rival boss. In this case, the landlord was Lenny Brook. Hale's reply was short: "Understood, will be vacant before New Year's." It was the closest thing to a signed contract they were likely to get. The Met's investigation widened. They weren't just looking at Hale and Kershaw anymore. They were looking at the Camden syndicate's entire operation. That meant mapping the supply chain. Financial analysts and drug import specialists from the National Crime Agency were brought in. They traced company registrations, freight manifests, and shipping data, building a picture of how the Camden syndicate moved their product. One key finding stood out: a heavy reliance on a single Rotterdam freight hub. It was the same hub that Lenny Brook's Southside crew had been using for years, the same hub where, months earlier, £5 million worth of cocaine had vanished in transit. What began to emerge was a chain of events: the Rotterdam loss, the Dover bust that crippled Southside's supply line, and now Brook's murder. The Met now had motive, means, and opportunity, not just for Hale, but for Kershaw himself. As the net tightened, the police began making moves. They started small, targeting the edges of the operation. First came the couriers. Two men in their 40s arrested in Norholt, both with prior convictions for smuggling alcohol. Inside their vans, police found hidden compartments still dusted with drug residue. Then came the stash house managers. A raid in Edmonton turned up 25 kilos of cocaine, 200,000 pounds in cash, and a ledger listing drop-off points across London. The handwriting matched that of a man seen meeting Kershaw's lieutenant outside a cafe in Holloway. The financial wing wasn't spared either. An accountant in Canary Wharf, legitimate, well-dressed, and horrified when the police arrived, was arrested after forensic analysis of his office computer revealed doctored invoices and coded payment trails designed to disguise cartel profits as legitimate construction income. Each arrest brought more information. Some spoke, eager to cut deals. Others stayed silent but carried phones or documents that told their story for them. By early March 2024, the picture was clear. Ryan Hale had carried out the hit on Lenny Brook, but he hadn't acted alone or on impulse. The order had come from Danny Kershaw, a calculated move to remove a rival, secure the Rotterdam route, and send a message to anyone thinking of crossing the Camden syndicate. The decision was made. It was time to take Kershaw down. Coordinated raids were planned across London, Essex, and Rotterdam, working alongside Dutch authorities. The goal wasn't just to arrest the shooter and the boss, it was to dismantle the entire supply line that had made them powerful in the first place. When Kershaw was finally picked up, it wasn't in some dramatic midnight raid. It was at 10:30 a.m. in the lobby of a glass-fronted office building in Canary Wharf, wearing a tailored suit on his way to what he claimed was a client meeting. The look on his face, one officer later said, was not fear, it was calculation. Even in handcuffs, he was thinking about the next move. The Brixton hit had started as a single crime scene, one man dead in a pub garden. By the time the investigation reached its peak, it had unraveled a network stretching from London to Rotterdam, backed by millions in illegal profits and enforced by violence that was planned like a business transaction. The arrests didn't end the drug trade in London. But for the first time in years, both the Camden Syndicate and the Southside crew were leaderless. And in the world of organized crime, that's not the end of the story. It's just the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. In the days after the murder, flowers began to appear outside the King's Arms, plastic-wrapped bouquets, handwritten notes in biro, a pint of lager left on the wall with the words, "Rest easy, Len," scrawled on a beer mat. To most locals, Lenny Brook wasn't a cartel boss. He was the man who tipped the bar staff at Christmas, who joked with the smokers in the garden, who sometimes picked up a round for strangers. A regular, part of the Thursday night rhythm. "It's hard to believe," one regular told reporters, standing in the drizzle, scarf pulled tight. "He was just here, every week. You never think something like that's going to happen in front of you. Not here." Neighbors in his South London street echoed the shock. A retired schoolteacher described hearing the news from a neighbor over the fence. "You see this stuff on TV, not on your doorstep. We thought it was a safe area. Turns out there was a war going on right under our noses." For the people who lived and worked in Brixton, the shooting was a reminder that the underworld isn't always an obvious presence. It doesn't arrive in convoys or gunfights. Sometimes it walks in quietly, waits for the right moment, and leaves as if nothing happened. London's underworld doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, plans, and pulls a trigger in a place you'd take your family for dinner. For the police, it was a high-profile arrest. For the underworld, it was a shift in the balance of power. But for the people in that pub garden, it was a moment they'd replay in their minds for years. A pint, a laugh, a sound they couldn't mistake, and a man they'd never see again. Ryan Hale's freedom lasted just 6 weeks.
By late December, surveillance had tracked him to a quiet safe house on the outskirts of Kent, a rented bungalow tucked behind a row of overgrown hedges. He rarely left except for short trips to a corner shop, always hood up, always looking over his shoulder. When the arrest team moved in at 4:15 a.m., he didn't fight. He simply raised his hands and said, "You've been outside all night, haven't you?" 2 days later, detectives knocked on the door of a luxury flat in Canary Wharf. Inside, Daniel Kershaw was halfway through a phone call, a view of the Thames behind him. The arrest was quiet, almost businesslike, but the moment the cuffs closed, the balance of London's drug scene shifted again. In the weeks before the trial, the Crown Prosecution Service built a case designed to leave no room for doubt. Forensic evidence linked Hale directly to the shooting: gunpowder residue on the abandoned delivery jacket, DNA from the helmet, and the ballistic match between recovered shell casings and a weapon found in a lockup Hale had visited days before the hit. The digital trail was just as damaging. Cell tower data put Hale's burner phone near the King's Arms hours before the shooting, then in Vauxhall minutes after. Encrypted chat logs recovered from his phone contained the coded exchange about removing the landlord, with Kershaw's number on the other end. Financial records showed unexplained deposits into Hale's girlfriend's account in the weeks after Brooks' death. For Kershaw, the evidence was indirect but devastating. Multiple witnesses placed him in meetings with Hale in the weeks leading up to the murder. Phone analysis confirmed calls and messages between the two at critical moments in the timeline, and the Rotterdam shipping records, paired with witness testimony from former couriers, painted a picture of a man willing to eliminate rivals to secure his supply line. The trial began in the spring of 2024 at the Old Bailey. Hale sat in the dock, clean-shaven, wearing a dark suit. Kershaw, as ever, looked composed, taking notes, conferring quietly with his legal team. Prosecutors laid out the case step by step: the cartel rivalry, the Dover bust, the barking stash house fire,
The surveillance, the hit in the Brixton pub garden. Jurors saw CCTV footage of the hooded figure on the scooter. They heard from forensic experts about the residue and DNA. They read the coded messages aloud in court, the phrases explained by detectives who had spent years listening to the language of organized crime. The defense painted Hale as a man manipulated by more powerful figures, and Kershaw as a businessman unfairly linked to criminal activity. But the weight of evidence was too much to shift. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury returned its decision. Ryan Hale was found guilty of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Daniel Kershaw was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. The judge was blunt in sentencing. Hale received life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years. Kershaw was given 28 years. Both men showed little reaction as the terms were read out. In the months that followed, the Camden syndicate fractured. Some members went underground. Others crossed over to rival crews, taking contacts and customers with them. For a time, the Rotterdam route went quiet, until, inevitably, new players moved in to fill the gap. On the surface, the arrests were a victory for the Met. But in the shadows, the war for London's supply lines simply reshaped itself. The faces at the top had changed, but the game remained the same. The streets didn't mourn Lenny Brook, but they noticed. And in London's cartel world, that's enough to start the next war. Power never stays vacant for long. It shifts, it waits, and sometimes it strikes before anyone even sees it coming. What do you think? Was this justice, or just one king making room for another? Drop your thoughts below. We read every single one. And if you want more real UK cartel stories like this, hit subscribe and watch the next one on how 3 Scottish lads were caught smuggling 500 kilograms of cocaine through sea into the UK.